Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'll talk about the HOA who tried to evict me, but now they've been evicted. I didn't plan on becoming the kind of person who keeps a banker's box labeled receipts for when people lose their minds, but life on the lake has a way of handing you folders you never expected. If I'd known that the friendly handshake I traded for a creaky old cabin would eventually lead to me changing the locks on a suit-and-tie boardroom that turned out to be sitting on my land, I might have started labeling that box sooner. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do. I mowed my little lawn, patched the dock, learned where the night herons like to fish, and paid the dues I was told to pay to an association that described itself as an informal neighborhood club for lake stewardship. On my second spring at the cabin, a guy named Peyton knocked on my door wearing a polo shirt the shade of an overwatered houseplant. He had the kind of smile you see on a brochure. There was a clipboard. There's always a clipboard. "Hey there," he said, his voice pitched to sell a car. "I'm with the association. You must be the new owner of Lot 14. "Been here a year," I said. "How can I help you?" He flicked his eyes at the porch where my old canoe leaned against the rail and then down at the cooler at my feet. I could feel him making a silent list. "We're conducting a friendly survey of compliance," he said. "Just to help folks get in line with the covenants, we noticed a couple small things, nothing crazy. Such as, the color of your shutters isn't on the approved palette. Also, that dock, it extends beyond the lot line. And we need to talk about your shed. I keep a steady attitude when strangers open with demands. Tell you what," I said, "if you hand me a copy of the covenants and the approved palette, I'll make sure I'm not breaking anything the law requires. I'll also take a look at the dock permit." Peyton coughed. "We don't, print those out for everyone. We have them at the office. It's not public-facing." "Office where?" I said. "Just off Maple Lane," he said, chin lifting like he was pointing to a place I should have known, between the old feed store and the hardware place. I nodded and made a mental note. The office location didn't match anything I had on my county map for the association, but I let it go. Peyton handed me a courtesy notice that read like the gentlest version of a demand letter. I stuck it in my box and didn't think about it again until midsummer, when the lake grew so clear you could see the sunken branches near the shoreline like a skeleton, and another notice showed up in my mailbox. This one thicker, stapled, and stamped with a seal. A formal notice of hearing to address my multiple violations. It included a 7-day deadline for repainting, a 30-day deadline for cutting back unauthorized vegetation, and a fee schedule that read like a menu in a restaurant where the soup of the day was nonsense. I went to the hearing because my grandfather taught me to never ignore paperwork with your name in bold. It was held in a beige room that had probably been a dentist's office once. You could smell the wintergreen from the carpets. There was a long table with a plastic runner down the middle and water pitchers sweating onto flimsy napkins. At the head sat a woman named Marissa, whose hair was pulled so tight it looked like it remembered a different decade. Peyton was to her left. On her right, a man with a notebook that turned out to be a code enforcement officer, a nameplate I couldn't pronounce, and an expression like the lake after a storm. Choppy, gray, and full of floating twigs you'd cut your foot on. Marissa smiled at me the way you smile at a child who's gotten into the sugar. "We're so glad you're here, Eli," she said. "We really prefer to resolve these things cooperatively. So let's talk about your nonconformities." "My what now?" "Nonconformities," she repeated as if she were teaching me a new word. "Starting with your exterior, that color breaks the harmony guidelines. Also the shed, which is not setback compliant. And the dock. The dock was built in 1988, I said. "I found the old permit in the basement. It's within the side lot line. I verified with the county's GIS. She blinked the way people blink when their script doesn't have a line for the actor who just went off book. "Be that as it may, the association has standards." "Great," I said. "Show me your authority." I didn't put any bite in the word, but it still sat on the table like a switchblade. Marissa's smile twitched. "Our authority," she said, "is in the covenant that runs with your property. You agreed to it when you purchased Lot 14. "Then you have a copy with my signature," I said. "Please bring it out." Peyton sucked on his cheek. The code enforcement officer's pen stopped moving. Marissa glanced at the woman in the corner who'd been taking attendance. Nobody moved. Finally, a thin man in a blazer brought a binder. He flipped pages that whispered like old leaves. He showed me a grainy photocopy of a document recorded sometime before I was born, with a list of rules about roof pitch and garbage cans. The legal description did not match my deed. "This is for Units A through E," I said, tapping the legal description. I'm Lot 14 in Block C on the South Cove Plat. I'm not governed by this. Marissa cleared her throat. There has been an expansion, she said. We're working on unifying the covenants across all lots for consistency. Working on, I repeated, but not recorded. She flinched, then smiled, then tried a different smile. Eli, we get it. You want to be independent. But this is a community. We need everyone to cooperate. I should have left it there, but I'd noticed something behind Marissa's chair when I walked in. A framed certificate with a parcel number on it. The parcel number rang a bell in my head. I remembered the county website. I remembered a little cluster of properties down by Maple Lane where the association claimed its office was. I smiled back. I'm all for cooperation, I said. Speaking of which, who owns this office? The association, Peyton said, a little too quickly. In the association's name, I asked. Of course, Marissa said. Which one? I asked. Because I only found one nonprofit with a similar name, and it was dissolved in the 90s. The one you filed 2 years ago spells a lakeside without these. The county records show a different owner for this parcel, a single-member LLC. There was a slow-motion shuffle at the table, like someone had kicked the pilot light. Peyton looked at Marissa, who looked at the thin man in the blazer. The code enforcement officer's pen started moving again, but it was drawing instead of writing. The thin man cleared his throat. That LLC is related to the association. I let the silence stretch. For transparency, I said, maybe tell me who the LLC's sole member is. Nobody volunteered. I had the paperwork in my box, but I didn't want to flex it yet. I just smiled and put my palms flat on the table. Look, I said, I'm not here to pick a fight, but I am here to tell you I'm not repainting my shutters to match your palette unless the palette applies to me. And I'm not paying fines your board invented. If you think you have authority, put it in writing and sign it. Otherwise, I'll consider this meeting a friendly chat and head back to my canoe. Marissa leaned forward, each word clipped. Eli, these are not optional. If you don't comply, we will take further action, including, if necessary, securing legal remedies up to and including eviction. I stared at her. Peyton looked pleased, like someone had laid down a final card. The code enforcement officer's pen went still again. Eviction, I said slowly, as if tasting a new spice. From my own property. From the association's property, she said. Common areas, lake access. You won't be permitted to use the dock until you're compliant, and we can place a lien on your cabin for unpaid fines. There are moments when you feel the air in your chest change temperature. Mine went from summer to October. I stood, careful and calm. Okay, I said, thank you for your time. I didn't slam the door on the way out. I didn't raise my voice. I walked to my truck and sat there with the windows open, listening to the cicadas rattle and the far-off sound of someone hammering a fence stake. Then I drove to the county building because if there's one thing I know how to do, it's read a ledger. My grandfather ran a hardware store and told me when I was 12, always look at the lines beneath the numbers. That's where the story lives. At the county, a clerk named Lily helped me pull plats, deeds, and filings. She had a way of flipping through legal descriptions like a librarian reading bedtime stories. We discovered more than one association had been formed and dissolved in the last 30 years. The office on Maple Lane came up as a parcel owned by a single-member LLC, just as I'd said. Lily pulled the LLC filing. We both stared at the name of the sole member, my own. I almost laughed out loud. I didn't recognize the LLC by name at first because it was one of those alphabet soup pairings accountants love. Then it hit me. The LLC was one of the catch-alls I'd picked up in a tiny tax sale the year before as part of a bundle that included an easement and a sliver of land near the old feed store. It had cost less than a decent kayak. Wait, I said, and Lily grinned. Yup, she said. You bought that skinny parcel last spring, remember? You asked me if it was worth anything, and I said, it's probably just a strip between two parking lots. I had filed the transfer and stuck the folder in my box. I had never visited the parcel because it was a strip and because life's short. And now it turned out that the association's beige office, where they'd just threatened to evict me, was built over 2 lots. One of those lots was mine. I asked Lily if I could get a copy of the lease. She said there wasn't one. No recorded lease between the LLC that owned the land, me, and the association, them. The building straddled my lot and another lot owned by someone else entirely, a small holding company with an address that matched the thin man's business. Building over 2 parcels without an easement might have been fine if there was a cross easement, but there wasn't one recorded. The certificate on the wall in the hearing room, it was a certificate of occupancy that referenced only the structural compliance, not the land ownership. The plot thickened like stew you forget on the stove. I went home and dragged my banker's box onto the table. I made tabbed folders, deeds, plats, filings, notices. I printed out the photo I'd taken of the certificate in the office and tucked it under filings. Then I called a property attorney named Hart, an old friend who does not suffer nonsense. He's the kind of person who can say, "Let's not escalate yet," and make you feel like escalations are his favorite sport. But he's saving himself for the playoffs. Hart listened. He asked for scanned copies. He called me an hour later. "You're not going to believe this," he said, which is funny, because I already did. The association's current corporate entity is out of good standing. They missed a filing. They're trying to enforce rules based on a document that doesn't encumber your lot. And that office, half the structure, maybe more, is on your parcel. There's no lease. There's no recorded easement for the building span. The entity that owns the other half is the board treasurer's holding company. I pulled the deed. I pulled the company registry. I pulled their minutes. They never disclosed that conflict when they decided to rent it to themselves. "Rent," I said. "Yeah," Hart said. "They've been collecting dues to parent to an LLC they control. They're calling it office overhead. It's creative." I drove to the lake to think. A heron lifted off the cattails and skimmed the surface. The water was still. My dock did not extend beyond the lot line. The shutters on my cabin were forest green, which my neighbor Dottie had called peaceful when she brought me pie. Dottie is 80 a day and sharper than a chisel. She was on her porch now, knitting something that sprang off her needles like she was catching thoughts from the air. "They came for you, didn't they?" she said when I walked up her steps. "They did. They came for me last year," she said. "Told me to take down my wind chimes. Said they violated the noise policy. I told them that when my Harold was alive, he slept through thunder. So if a handful of little bells could disturb the peace, maybe they were listening for the wrong music." I smiled. "You paid them?" She made a noise. I put their envelope under a wobbly chair leg. It was the most useful it had been. Then I got another notice. Said if I didn't cut down the pine near my fence, they'd do it and charge me. That pine's older than any of them. Harold hung a swing on it for our boy. I looked at the pine. It was big and healthy. The swing, a clean arc of rope, hung still. "They're not the law," I said. "Try telling them that," Dottie said, her needles clacking. "They walk around like they carry the sheriff's badge in their tote bags." I went home and called Hart again. "I'm not interested in a lawsuit if I can avoid it," I said. "But I'm not paying a dime to fix shutters that don't need fixing under rules that don't apply. And I'm not letting them bully Dottie." "You might not need a lawsuit," Hart said. "At least not the kind you're picturing," he explained. "Property law is a garden with 100 gates. If someone builds a structure over your land without your permission, you have options. You can throw a fit and demand demolition, which is dramatic and expensive and likely to tie you up for years. Or you can acknowledge the structure, assert your rights, and control access. If the building sits on your land, then the portion on your lot exists at your pleasure, subject to whatever agreement there is, and here there was none. "What if I become their landlord?" I said, and Hart hummed. "Landlord is a strong word without a lease," he said. "But yes, you can assert that the building occupies your property and is functioning without your consent. You can give notice, you can demand they vacate. If they don't, you can start an action for ejectment. Note, not eviction in the tenant sense. Ejectment is broader, for people who wrongfully possess property. You can also seek a declaratory judgment that their covenants don't apply to you. And, if you're feeling spicy, you can file a complaint with the State Attorney General's Charity Bureau. If they're collecting dues for a nonprofit that's out of good standing and funneling money to insider-controlled entities that's asking for a look. "I'm feeling spicy," I said. We drafted a letter. It was not dramatic, it was not sarcastic. It was a tidy piece of language that said, in effect, "Dear Board, thank you for your correspondence. Attached, please find certified copies of the recorded documents demonstrating that my lot is not encumbered by your referenced covenants. Additionally, I have recently reviewed the status of the parcel at parcel number, where you conduct business. I am the sole member of the entity that owns that parcel. I have been unable to locate a lease with your organization or any easement that would authorize your encroachment. Accordingly, I hereby revoke any implied license for your occupancy and demand, within 10 days, that you cease operations on my property, remove all personal property from the portion of the premises that lies within my parcel, and coordinate with me regarding use of ingress, egress. Any further entry will be treated as trespass. I remain open to discussing a properly documented arrangement. However, no such agreement currently exists. We sent it certified and by email. Hart also copied the county code enforcement office because the officer who'd been at the hearing had quietly slid me his card on the way out with a look that said, "I'm not taking sides, but please call me before we all drive off a cliff." It turned out he didn't love being used as the association's thug, especially when the association wasn't in good standing. Here is where the story gets twisty in the way you can only really appreciate if you've ever pulled on a thread and found yourself holding an entire sweater. The day after the letter, I got a polite voicemail from the association's treasurer, a man named Curtis, who spoke in a voice like wet cardboard. He suggested we sit down and clear up misunderstandings. I said I'd be happy to meet at their office next Wednesday at 9. He sounded relieved. He didn't ask the obvious question, which is what office I meant, or whether they still had the right to sit in it. On Tuesday, I went down to the parcel and walked the boundary. I brought a surveyor's wheel and my friend Ray, who does land work and keeps a level in his truck the way some men keep golf clubs. We found the rebar pins. We tied pink flags from the parking lot stripe to the edge where the maple roots had buckled the asphalt. A good slice of the building clearly lay over my line. I set up a sawhorse at the boundary and put a plywood board across it, neatly painted in block letters, "Private property boundary. No entry beyond this point without owner consent." I mounted a simple trail camera in the maple, set to snap images at motion. I wasn't trying to start a fight in the parking lot. I was setting the stage. Dottie came by carrying a basket. "I heard you were doing a little construction," she said, eyes twinkling. "Just playing with boards," I said. She handed me the basket. Inside, wrapped in a tea towel, were biscuits. "For strength," she said. "If they come flapping, you call me. I'll bring my knitting needles." Wednesday morning, I put on a clean shirt and drove to Maple Lane with a copy of my deed, the parcel map, and a bright, perfectly legal sign that read, "Notice, by entering this portion of the premises, you consent to the owner's posted rules. Rule 1, knock and ask permission." I set the sign at eye level by the door that opened onto my part of the building. Then I waited by the sawhorse, sipping coffee. The board arrived in a herd, Marissa, her hair looking even tighter, Peyton, polo the color of envy, Curtis in a sweater vest despite the heat, and the thin man in a blazer, whose name I learned was Jory. They stopped dead when they saw the sawhorse. "What is this?" Marissa demanded. "Boundary," I said. "This portion of the building sits on my parcel. No one comes across without permission." "This is absurd," Peyton said. "You can't just—" Curtis put a hand up, peacemaker mode. "Let's all take a breath," he said. "We can meet inside." "We can meet on my side," I said, "which includes the front conference room and the copy alcove. That exterior door, the one you've been using, it opens onto my land, so we'll be using it under my rules." Jory's eyes darted to the boundary stakes. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "We should call counsel," he said. "I'm here," I said, and tapped my folder. We ended up meeting in the conference room with the air conditioner rattling and a moth slowly headbutting the fluorescent light cover. I laid out copies of the documents. I highlighted the lines that mattered. When I was done, there wasn't much to argue about. The parcel map didn't care about their moods. "So," I said, folding my hands, "I'm happy to entertain a temporary arrangement while you move your operations to a lawful location. That arrangement would include you acknowledging in writing that your association, whichever entity is currently trying to claim that name, has no authority over my lot, has wrongfully assessed dues to me, and will cancel any purported fines. It would also include a daily fee for your use of this space payable to my LLC, in an amount we'll set based on market rates, plus a hold harmless clause. You will also rescind all notices issued to my neighbor Dottie and anyone else whose lots are not properly encumbered. You will stop representing yourselves as a governing authority until your corporate status is in good standing and your covenants are recorded and actually run with the properties in question." Marissa's cheeks had gone the color of a stop sign. "You can't do this," she said. "We're the association." "Then act like one," I said. "Start with the law." Curtis tried the soft sell. "Maybe we can do a smaller fee," he suggested. "We're a volunteer board. We're just trying to keep things nice." "You threatened to evict me from a lake my grandfather taught me to fish on," I said. "You sent a notice to an 80-year-old woman about a pine tree. You collect dues to pay rent to yourselves." I slid a paper forward. "Here's the complaint I drafted to send to the State Charity Bureau, asking them to examine whether you're a legitimate nonprofit or a money funnel. Here's a draft to the county about the unpermitted electrical work in this very building." I assume you didn't pull a permit for that server rack? Here's a draft to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, asking them to look at your dues collection under false authority. I will file these this afternoon if you don't sign my temporary arrangement, and while we're at it, I'll file for ejectment." Jory's jaw worked. He was calculating. He knew the cost of a fight, not just in dollars but in daylight. Peyton's knee bounced. Curtis stared at the paperwork. Marissa picked up a pen, put it down, picked it up again. "You're blackmailing us," she said weakly. "No," I said. "I'm asking you to stop acting like bullies and start acting like adults, and to pay rent for occupying my land." They signed. The arrangement was modest: 30 days to vacate, a clear statement that their covenants didn't run with my lot, cancellation of my fines, and rescission of any nuisance notices issued under improperly applied rules. They'd pay a per diem for the 30 days, calculated at a fair market rate that made Curtis blanch. We took a photo of the signed papers with everyone in the frame. I emailed a copy to Hart and another to myself. Then I walked them to the boundary and reminded them with a smile that the next time they crossed into my parcel, they needed to knock. That afternoon, Lily from the county called me, her voice a blend of curiosity and admiration. "Whatever you did, it stirred the pot," she said. The code enforcement officer called. He's reviewing their recent complaints with a skeptical eye, and I saw an email from the Charity Bureau asking for the association's most recent filings. Meanwhile, 3 neighbors have come in asking how to check whether their lots are actually subject to those covenants. "Point them to the public records," I said, "and tell them to bring biscuits to Dottie." Here is where the second plotline sprouts: the environmental committee that didn't exist but loved to lecture. Before my boundary drama, Peyton had been on a crusade against unauthorized vegetation, which turned out to mean he wanted people to replace native plants with river rock because he didn't like dragonflies. He said reeds made the shore look messy. He'd threatened a guy named Nolan down the street with herbicide action. Nolan is the opposite of a fight. He has a garden sign that says "Pollinators Welcome." When Peyton tried to pour Roundup near Nolan's milkweed, Nolan cried. After the arrangement with the office, Peyton's swagger dimmed. But he still walked by my place that evening and said, "We'll see how long your attitude works when the rest of the board votes to take you to small claims for back dues." He said it like I would get dizzy at the phrase "small claims," like a person who thinks a courtroom is just a bigger high school cafeteria. "Here's a thought," I said. "Instead of spending an evening filling out forms to sue me over dues I don't owe, use the time to book a moving truck. You're 2 days into your 30-day clock." He walked off, muttering something about people who think they're clever. Dottie, who had been watering her geraniums, called out, "Some of us don't think, some of us are." The punishment part of this story didn't happen in one blow. It happened in a series of honest legal actions that, taken together, made clear to the board that they couldn't act like a government when they were, at best, a club with a binder and a dream. First, the code enforcement officer quietly closed 4 of their open complaints and wrote a note in the file about lack of jurisdiction. Second, the Charity Bureau sent a letter requesting records. Third, I posted a neat plain language sign on the community bulletin board at the boat launch, an area they liked to pretend they controlled but didn't, explaining how to check if your lot is actually subject to any covenants. I listed the steps and the county office hours. I didn't name names. I didn't even mention the office parcel, but neighbors talk. And by the weekend, the lake was buzzing in the way small lakes buzz when the biggest fish jumps. By Monday, I had 3 calls from people who'd gotten violation notices for things like non-compliant trellis height and unapproved compost bin. A woman named Kendra told me she'd paid a $150 appeal fee to have the board consider letting her keep a rain barrel. I nearly swallowed my tongue. "They charged you to appeal?" I said. She emailed me the receipt with the memo line, "Administrative appeal processing." Hart shook his head when I sent it. If they were a properly formed association with covenants that ran with the property, they might have the right to charge some fees to administer their processes, he said. But here, they're charging for nothing. That's going to look ugly when the Charity Bureau asks where that money went. It looked uglier when the Charity Bureau asked and learned that the money went into office rent paid to an LLC whose owners were sitting at the board table. The Bureau investigator, who sounded on the phone like she ate lies for breakfast, called me to clarify a timeline. I stuck to the facts. I wasn't out to bring them grief for sport. I just wanted my shutters left alone and my neighbor's pine to keep its swing. But facts have a way of applying pressure all by themselves. On day 10 of the 30, I walked by the office to check for knocks. There was a stack of boxes by the door and a printer on a dolly. Curtis was inside, red-faced and sweating, unplugging something that had more blinking lights than a holiday display. He saw me and straightened his back. "We're working on it," he said, defensive. "I can see that," I said. "Do you have a destination?" "We're going to move into Jory's company suite for a bit," he said carefully, "just until we get our paperwork back in order." "Paperwork has a way of needing the truth," I said. "Good luck." "Look," he blurted, "we weren't trying to be villains, it just got away from us." "That happens with snow shovels and dogs," I said. "Not with other people's property." He swallowed and nodded. "Understood," he said. As the days passed, more plot lines tied into the main rope. Dottie's Pine got a visit from the code enforcement officer, not to cut it down, but to give it the little metal tag they put on heritage trees. He said he was doing it citywide and had been planning to for years, but you could tell this one brought him particular satisfaction. Nolan's milkweed got a laminated sign. "Protected habitat, do not spray." Peyton stopped walking past Nolan's house altogether. A neighbor named Jonas, who runs a kayak rental out of his garage on weekends, texted me a photo of a cease operations letter the board had slipped under his door at midnight. It accused him of running a commercial business in a residential area. He'd been too scared to tell anyone. Jonas doesn't ruffle easily, but threats of fines make good people cautious. I looked up the zoning. He was within his rights. His activity didn't hit the thresholds that would make him a business under the code. I wrote him a calm letter he could send back that essentially said, "Thanks for your concern. Here's the law. Please do not trespass again." He sent it certified. The board didn't reply. And then there was the lake itself. Beneath all the paperwork, the water stayed the heart of this place. The association bragged about exclusive access, posted a members-only sign at the public launch, and parked a volunteer in a lawn chair to check passes. The county never authorized it. This lake is public, with riparian rights for shoreline owners and a county access. When I mentioned the lawn chair routine to code enforcement, the officer sighed and sent county parks. Next Saturday, a truck rolled up. A real parks employee handed the bouncer a copy of the public access rules, and the sign vanished before dusk. By day 29, their office was almost empty. My trail camera caught 3 board members carrying a ficus across my property line. When the last box left, I stepped into the hollow room, floor echoing like a shell. Scuffs on the walls, a few thumbtacks, and a box of compliance summons forms designed to mimic county stationery. I set the box at the curb with a note, "Free scrap paper." That evening, an all-hands email apologized for confusion, promised a pause on enforcement, and sought volunteers for a governance working group. It included a donate button. The next day, a corrected link pointed to a nonprofit in good standing. Someone had finally checked the filings. On day 30, Hart met me at the office. We changed the locks on doors that opened onto my parcel and posted a plain sign, "Private property, authorized access by permission only." The other entrance, on the other parcel, wasn't my problem. I set a small desk and 2 chairs. I didn't want a trophy. I wanted a space where nonsense didn't live. When the locks clicked, it felt like the end of a long, silly song. Dottie drove by with a thumbs up. Hart shook my hand. A heron lifted from the ditch and headed for the water. Punishment isn't always gavels. Sometimes it's a boundary that makes the wrong people feel the friction they've been handing out, carrying their own boxes through a door built on land owned by the person they threatened. It teaches better than speeches. The board didn't vanish, it mutated. Some stormed off. Others tried to fix it. Then came a knock and a hand-delivered small claims complaint. Lake Association v. Eli, demanding dues, enforcement costs, appeal fees, and reputational harm. Tucked behind it, a lien the clerk had rejected. No supporting covenant recorded. The county had applied the rules. "They just gave you a platform," Hart said. "We prepared like a campout. Certified copies, trail cam timestamps, the Charity Bureau's records request, and the county's note about public access." In court, the judge asked the only question that mattered. "Do you have a recorded covenant running with his parcel?" They did not. I handed up my deed and the agreement they'd signed to vacate the office spanning my land. The judge dismissed with prejudice, awarded my costs, and declared their covenants didn't apply to me. Then Dottie rose with her own claim, repayment for bogus notices and a small statutory penalty for deceptive collection. She won. "Treehouse fund," she whispered, and grinned like a kid. They tried one more paper storm, cease and desist to Jonas for his weekend kayak lending. We answered with the zoning code and patience. Jonas set out a chalkboard. Kayak Saturdays, donation box only, be safe, be kind. Parents took pictures, it became a small landmark. The Charity Bureau's letter landed hard. Records, insider deal disclosures, copies of any leases with board-owned entities. 30 days. Under that weight, Curtis met me with tired honesty. They'd shut down the rent funnel, refund appeal fees, seek a compliance plan, resign some folks, and retire the word evict. I hosted a one-day check-your-deed clinic in my quiet office. Lily from the county came. Neighbors left with copies and confidence. The jar for the treehouse filled. The association split for good. The loudest left, the steady stayed. They posted minutes, listed which lots were actually encumbered, and planned potlucks and cleanups instead of threats. A consent agreement followed. Independent audit, restitution fund, open bidding for insider contracts, and a 2-year ban on fiduciary roles for 2 board members who'd engineered the rent scheme. The county warned them off faux official forms. Peyton did park service, hauling weeds and learning plant names. We built the treehouse right, a freestanding platform near Dottie's Pine. Jonas raised money with a paddle-a-thon. Nolan brought lemonade. Kids drew treasure maps, and the lake sounded like gratitude. Marissa found me and apologized. Structure without consent is just paper lines, she said. Later, a good neighbor pledge appeared. An invitation, not a covenant. We all signed, then shared pie. Life settled. I mow, fix dockboards, and keep my box of receipts labeled closed. Sometimes I rest my boot on the boundary stake by the old office and repeat the line that mattered. This portion of the building sits on my parcel. No one crosses without permission. Locks clicked, papers filed, boundaries respected. The lake went back to being the loudest voice. We kept it that way, together, always, afterward. Now you, HOA, are evicted from my private property office, from my patience, and from the habit of pretending you're the law. And that is the end. Friends, thank you. See you soon.